spending has gone up, and of course the House is now controlled by Democrats, but Republicans run the Senate. Nonetheless, it seems to me, having been there now for 8 years, regardless of who is in charge, spending goes up. But both parties keep spending money, keep growing government, and that seems to go unabated. So when we had this whole discussion over wall funding, it was all related to a spending bill, but the spending bill was largely ignored. Very few people even talked about the spending bill. So the wall funding that was not included in a spending bill that spent $330 billion. So it was a very large spending bill, although even that is small compared to the overall amount of spending each year. We spend, as a government, over $4 trillion. So you're talking about $4 trillion of spending. The spending bill itself was $330 billion. The wall funding, which everyone was on both the left and the right making it to the main issue, that was a discussion of about $5 billion out of the $330 billion, which is out of the $4+ trillion. So it's important to put that all in perspective so we know what we're dealing with. As much as both sides were fighting about the wall, nobody was talking about the spending. Members of Congress weren't talking about it other than me and maybe a few others. And the media certainly weren't talking about it. So that's something we all need to keep our eye on. The spending continues to grow. I know that there are people who talk about the tax cuts and they say, well, the tax cuts are causing the deficit. No, the spending dwarfs the tax cuts. So when you talk about the tax cuts, you're talking about maybe about $150 billion per year. But that spending bill alone that we just voted on, which was again a very small part of the budget, out of the $4+ trillion, relatively small, $330 billion. Even that is, say, twice the size of the tax cut. So that's just that one spending bill. So it's important to put it all in perspective. The reason we have trillion-dollar deficits is because we spend way too much money as a government, and it doesn't seem like anyone's really interested in addressing that. As for my record, I think most of you know I'm very fiscally conservative. I have voted for the least amount of spending of anyone in Congress since I've been there. There's an organization that keeps track of this. They actually just add up all of the bills we voted on. It's just a mathematical thing. They put it into a spreadsheet. And I've spent the least amount of money of any member of Congress since I entered Congress, in either the House or the Senate. Because I believe our government's too big, spends way too much money, and we have to get it under control. So let me talk about this emergency situation, the emergency power. And I'll explain to you why I think the President is going beyond what is allowed under our Constitution. And I think Congress is really at fault for creating the situation. But the President has gone beyond what is permitted under our Constitution. I'll explain why to you. So I think most of you know our Constitution divides powers between the three branches: legislative, executive, judicial. And the job of the legislative branch is to make laws. And one of the most important powers of the legislative branch is the appropriations power, which again falls under making laws. And it's one of our most important powers. And if you go back and read the founders and the framers of the Constitution, you'll see that they cared deeply about keeping this power in Congress. It's a legislative power, and ensuring that Congress controlled the purse as a check on the executive branch. Now, it has always been understood since the beginning of our country that there would be emergency situations where Congress doesn't have time to act. That was always understood. And if you go back, and I've spent a lot of time reading, again, the framers of the Constitution, if you go back and read, for example, the debates on the first Constitutional Convention, you'll find, or the debates in creating the Constitution, you'll find that the framers were concerned about emergency situations. So, for example, when they were talking about war powers, the original drafting said that Congress would have the power to make war. And they were worried that that would give too little power to the executive. That if you use the word make, then what if we were suddenly attacked and, and you leave all the power to make war in Congress, then how are we going to react? So they decided to change the word make to declare. And you can see in their notes that they did that because they wanted to leave to the executive the power to repel sudden attacks. Which means they thought there was some inherent power that the executive had to deal with emergencies. They always understood there was some inherent power in an emergency situation. The executive has to act quickly and can deal with such things. You'll note that nowhere else in the Constitution does it give the power to the president to just decide to go to war with someone, even in an emergency. It doesn't say anything about emergencies or going to war like that. But the founders, the framers of the Constitution, understood it to be allowed, to be permitted, that in an emergency situation, the president could act. But it's important to understand that emergency does not just mean that something bad is happening. And we all know this in our normal lives. The word emergency doesn't mean simply that something bad is happening. There's a time element to the idea of an emergency, something that requires immediate action. And emergency situations are situations where there's consensus. When you have an emergency, let's say you have a fire at someone's house. Nobody's asking whether the firefighters are trespassing on the property when they go in to put out the fire, right? It's an emergency. There's consensus. Everyone agrees that you have to put out the fire. You have to save lives. And it doesn't fall along partisan lines. Nobody's thinking, well, I'm a Republican. I think that's an emergency. I'm a Democrat. I don't think that's an emergency. Anything like that. There's consensus. It's understood. Similarly, when there's a national emergency, there should be consensus. Congress can't act. Normally Congress makes the laws, but Congress doesn't have time to deal with it. There's no opportunity to deal with it. So the executive needs to act quickly. So it's important to think about this time element when it comes to emergencies. The time element is crucial to the legality of an emergency. So you ask yourself, again, going back to the reason we have all this, what is the purpose of allowing emergency powers? The question you have to ask is, does Congress have an opportunity to act? Because you're going beyond what is normally allowed under the Constitution. Under the Constitution, Congress has legislative powers. If the president is going to assume legislative powers, the thing you have to ask is, why is he going to do that? And the question you should ask is, does Congress have an opportunity to act? If Congress has an opportunity to act, then it doesn't fall under an emergency under our Constitution. It can't be an emergency under our Constitution because Congress has legislative powers, not the president under our Constitution. You also have to ask, is the action the executive branch is taking, does it resolve the issue immediately? So, going back to the fire example, if a house were on fire, you wouldn't say, hey, I know how to resolve this emergency, let's build a new fire department. Right? Nobody would say that. But the executive action that's being proposed here for this emergency that the president has declared is to do a multi-year construction project. So if the president were to say, hey, there's an emergency, I need to send troops to the border immediately to address this thing, that's one thing. You could say, well, maybe that's an emergency. If there's actual action that happens quickly, and Congress didn't have time to deal with it, and the president sends troops rapidly to deal with it, okay, someone could see that as an emergency, but something like a multi-year construction project doesn't really fall under the idea of emergency. Another issue to consider here is that this issue has been on the table for a long time, the idea of wall funding. And it's been debated over the past 2 years at least. So it's been at least debated under this president for the last 2 years. It's been debated long before that, I agree with you on that. But it's been debated under this president for 2 years. And he's talked about it, he's certainly talked about it. But every time a spending bill went to his desk, he signed it. He never vetoed it. So if something were an emergency, you'd think the first thing you do as the president is veto the spending bill that doesn't give you the funding you need for the emergency. First thing you do. First thing I do. If I thought something was an emergency and Congress sent me a spending bill that doesn't include funding for the thing that I think is critical, I veto it. The president never vetoed it. He signed the bills. In fact, one of my colleagues pulled up, I think he may have signed about a dozen bills that were spending bills where he could have at any time said, you didn't provide me the funding I need, so I'm going to stop this bill, I'm going to veto it, and I'm going to send it back to you. So that's a real problem with the argument that it is an emergency. Now, let's even imagine that none of that is a problem. Okay? That is a huge problem. But let's imagine that none of that's a problem, and we agree that the president can just declare anything he wants to be an emergency. He can declare anything. So there's no time element, there's no, none of that matters. He can say something's an emergency even if half of us think it's not an emergency. Or a quarter, or whatever it might be. There's still a problem. So under the legislation he's applying, 10 U.S.C. 2808, there is an unconstitutional delegation of legislative powers in the legislation. You can't delegate legislative powers to the executive branch. That legislation allows the president to take already appropriated funds and to shift them around to any other military construction project he wants. So think about it this way. We have a whole spending bill called Military Construction and Veterans Affairs. That's an entire spending bill. In fact, there's a subcommittee in Congress just dedicated to this issue, military construction and Veterans Affairs. And the president, by using this law, which again I say is an unconstitutional delegation of legislative powers, by using this law is allowed to take money that's already been appropriated to other things and to move it to any other project he wants. Now, what I'll sometimes hear is, well, that's not an appropriation. He's just moving money around that's already been appropriated. But that's a misunderstanding of the word appropriation. Appropriation doesn't just mean to draw money from the Treasury. Appropriation means to draw money from the Treasury and apply it to a specific object. So when money is taken from one object and applied to a different object, you have a reappropriation. Now you have a new appropriation, and appropriations are specifically legislative powers under the Constitution. It's not something you can delegate to the executive branch. So for people who say, well, Congress gave him this power, Congress is not allowed to give him that power. We can't do it. It's unconstitutional. We can't decide that the executive branch is the Supreme Court. We can't decide that the executive branch is the legislative branch. It's not possible under our Constitution. So there's a delegation problem here. So that gives you the background I wanted to give you on why I have problems with this emergency declaration. As I've said many times, if people want to put an amendment up on the floor or a bill up on the floor that cuts spending overall for our government and funds the wall the way the president wants, I'd be supportive of it. But what they continue to put up is massive spending bills that increase spending, in which case, whether there's the $5 billion for the wall or not, I think is not the biggest issue at hand. I think the bigger issue is, can we get our spending under control? And let's see some legislation. If someone wanted to offer an amendment and fund the wall, and cut spending somewhere else, okay, that's something I could be supportive of. But I don't support this idea of Congress deliberating something for a couple of years, having multiple votes on it, having the president sign the bills without the funding, and then after all of that saying, well, no, now it's an emergency and I'm just going to go around Congress and fund it myself the way I want to. That's a real problem. And I know there are a lot of conservatives in this room. That's something conservatives should be concerned about. We should care about this because we have a system of federalism, we have a system of separation of powers. We should care about these things, whether we have a Republican president in office or a Democratic president in office. If we don't care about these things, we lose what we are as Americans. We lose our entire system. And I've witnessed over the last couple of years, too often people deciding that they like the outcome, so forget about the process. Forget about the Constitution, forget about the rule of law, forget about federalism, because I want the particular outcome. And that is a really dangerous road to go down. And people really reach for excuses then for why they're supportive of it, when it's very obvious that if President Obama were doing the same thing, it would not be supported. It would not be supported. So I wouldn't support this kind of thing under President Obama. I'm not going to support it under President Trump. We have to follow our Constitution. We have to respect separation of powers, and that's how I'll operate as a legislator. So I want to talk about just a couple more things, and then I'll open up for questions. I just want to let you know what bills I've sponsored. I sponsored one bill. It is partly related to this issue. DHS, when going along the border, sometimes takes property using eminent domain. And I want to make sure that when property is taken through eminent domain, people are getting a value that is fair to them. So what often happens is DHS does these quick takes where they take the property, the amount of money that will be handed to the person, that will be given to the person for the property, is not adjudicated yet. So then the person ends up in court trying to figure out how much money they're going to get for the property that was taken. And meanwhile, the government's already taken the property, which puts them in a much weaker position. And I don't think that the government should take anyone's property, anywhere in the country, should take anyone's property without first adjudicating with the person to make sure that they got fair value for the property. So I have a bill called the Eminent Domain Just Compensation Act, and that's one of the bills I introduced. I have another bill that I introduced called the Ballot Fairness Act. It's a totally separate issue. This is related to the way our elections are designed to make it difficult for people to run outside of the two major parties. And I think that is a huge problem for our country. And I've witnessed it more and more with the partisanship that goes on in D.C. We need to make it easier for people to be able to run outside of these two parties. And what it would do is it would say the states can't set rules that would make it more difficult for someone who's not in the major two parties to make the ballot than someone who's in the two major parties. So sometimes you have disparate ballot access rules where if you're in the two major parties, you get ballot access. If you're outside the major parties, you have to collect more signatures, or you have to clear other hurdles. It should be the same for everyone. It shouldn't matter whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, Green, whatever. You should have equal ballot access laws so that people can decide to participate in the process the same way. The other thing is, I get rid of straight ticket voting. I think straight ticket voting is one of the biggest election problems we face in this country because it funnels people again. Straight ticket voting.
Isn't it gone?
So Michigan throughout, I don't know how long, but for a long time had straight ticket voting. It was taken away for 1 year, and then it was brought back by ballot initiative just recently. I think this was a big mistake.
Good.
It was a big mistake to bring it back.
Nope.
because it, again, benefits the two major parties at the expense of everyone else. It's designed to enhance partisanship. Because when you go to vote on the ballot, and you have straight ticket voting, it's so easy to just pick one of those two major parties and move on. And if someone were to run as an independent candidate in this type of system with straight ticket voting, that person has no chance of being elected. I think it's one of the reasons Michigan has so few independent candidates elected. Actually, other states sometimes do elect independent candidates to office. Michigan, you rarely hear of this. I'm not sure I know of any independent candidates elected. And one of the main reasons is straight ticket voting, because it is very difficult to get elected as an independent candidate or as a third party candidate with straight ticket voting. Moreover, it is a solution in search of a problem. If you know you're going to vote for the people, for all the candidates from one party, it is not difficult to vote. It is not difficult to vote. That's the easiest ballot you can cast. You go down, if you want all Republicans, you just fill in all the Republicans. It's super easy. It says Republican right by their name. It does not take a long time to do so. If you want all Democrats, pick all the Democrats. Actually, the people who take a long time voting are the people who don't vote all one party. Those are the people who would like some help. And there's no way to help them out. But those are the people who could use some help. The people who are all going to vote one party, they don't need help to make it faster. It's already fast. You just find the person with the party you want, and you pick it. Now, for people who are worried about long lines, they say, well, there's going to be long lines at the ballots. Then open up more precincts.
Yeah.
Open up more precincts. Extend the hours of voting. There are other solutions. You shouldn't mess up the whole electoral system for the people of Michigan because you're concerned about these aspects which can be fixed in other ways. So we should fix them in the other ways and not have straight ticket voting on our ballots. I think that's a real threat to democracy. It's a threat to our system of government. And it's designed to benefit the two-party establishments at the expense of the people of Michigan. Lastly, I'll say I co-sponsored Rep. Barbara Lee's authorization for use of military force repeal. So Barbara Lee is a Democrat. It's a bipartisan bill. There's an authorization for use of military force that was put in place after 9/11 to go after the perpetrators of 9/11. It was used for that purpose effectively. We went into Afghanistan. We went after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. It should not be used to go after anyone in the world, anywhere, anytime a president wants to. But that's how it's used these days. So all of these conflicts you hear about, whether it's Syria or Yemen or Somalia or other places, you hear about these conflicts. The executive branch, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, because President Obama did it, for example, in Libya, they use this old authorization and they say, well, we're allowed to do whatever we want because it's somehow connected to terrorism, so this authorization covers it. That is not okay. That's not the way our system is supposed to work. Every time we go into a different conflict, there should be a different authorization from Congress. Bring it to Congress, let us vote on it, so that we can represent the American people in that vote. So I co-sponsored that repeal. I think that the president, if he wants to go into any conflict, this was a big dispute I had with President Obama because he went into several conflicts without authorization. And he would rely on this. And President Trump has done the same in some instances as well. So we need to repeal this AUMF and ensure that the president is going to Congress. So, sorry that was a long explanation or long intro, but I will open it up to questions. So thank you for being here.
What conflict has Trump brought into our dialogue?
So, yeah, the question is, So the question is what conflict, and the best example right now, although he did not start it, but Yemen is one of those examples where we are assisting the Saudis with a number of operations. Syria also has U.S. troops, and there's no authorization for that. It's not, I'm not, whether he's starting it or continuing it. So, well, I'll tell you what I do. If I were president, what I do, this is a simple fix. If I were president, I would say to Congress, you have 90 days to give me an authorization for this conflict. If you don't, I'm going to bring the troops home. And I don't know why it's not.
Why are we the policemen of the world?
But I agree with you.
Why? No.
That's my point is, the president, any president, if they want to resolve this, President Trump or anyone else, can resolve it. They just say, I'm bringing the troops home unless you give me the authorization. But he hasn't said that. So I don't think you can say, well, he didn't start it, and therefore no problem. He has a responsibility as president, as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, to say, I don't feel I'm authorized to conduct these operations, therefore I'm going to begin to withdraw troops unless you give me an authorization. That hasn't happened, and I'd like to see that happen. Yes, sir.
You talk about fiscal responsibility, and comparing that to the border situation. The cost of taking care of the illegal that cross the border every year, every month, whatever, far outweighs the cost of what's being put forth for border security, whether it be the wall or any other portions of it. And to say that, and I agree with you with your explanation about this 1970-some thing that Congress passed being unconstitutional. If that's the case, then Congress has an immediate responsibility to take care of that. And so, taking care of that would eliminate this executive power. However, this border situation has been going on to numerous presidents, and nobody, Congress, will not do anything about it. I understand you're only one person, and it appears it's going to be tougher rather than more bipartisan effort. So, the point is, if we're looking at fiscal responsibility, I've seen some figures in the like $3 or $4 billion a year that costs to what's the incarcerate. There's four issues that they put a figure on, and it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
$135 billion.
$135 billion a year to incarcerate.
Where's that figure from? Where's the 135 billion from? The Washington Examiner?
One at a time.
Anyway, regardless of all the constitutional issues, and I agree with you, we should not be disregarding the Constitution. However, from a fiscal responsibility that you're talking about, certainly it would seem to make way more sense to put this $5 billion or $23 billion or whatever into a wall and help funnel these people. We know it's not going to stop everything. And then the news media puts out all this stuff, well, it's not going to stop all the immigration or illegal immigration. It's not. But it's going to funnel people to a different location, and it's going to make it easier for those unprotected areas to monitor. But it would seem way more fiscally responsible to put the money into the wall and do that portion of it and stop. I mean, billions of dollars a year.
Well, Mexico will pay for the wall. Mexico will pay for it. Right? Yeah. No, Mexico's going to pay for it.
Hold on. Questions to me.
We don't have to pay for it.
Okay. If you have a question.
Well,
Yeah.
why is Congress then doing something about this? Reject that 1970s law that gives the president, the executive, that kind of power, and come up with a immigration system that works.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think that I agree with you that we should come up with an immigration system that works, and that there's merit to the idea of having some additional fencing or border security or some kind of, I think when the president says wall, he just means some kind of enhanced fencing. I'm not sure that he means like some kind of, wall as people sometimes envision it. I'm not sure you need one across the entire border. There may be certain spots where you need it and other spots where you don't. But I think it could be a benefit, and there could be a way to reduce overall costs by having it. The issue for me, though, is again you have to do it the right way. So we have to still go through the legislative process. If we want to live in a free society, then we have to also abide by our system of government. And our system says that Congress gets to decide these things, not the president. We may not like what members of Congress are doing, but that's what they're doing. And I think you
Justin Amash.
I think, but the issue is then you can elect different people to Congress. I mean, you can choose different people. But you have to remember that not everyone in the country agrees with the people, for example, here in this room. There'll be differences of opinion. So some people will agree with you and some people won't agree with you. And that's how our system of government works. And but this is just how. But that's like that kind of criticism misses the boat. Because again, you don't get to do just whatever you want just because Congress didn't agree. I've told you that I would be willing to support additional funding. That wasn't my issue. But the problem is Congress has not approved it. And if the fact is, if Congress hasn't approved it, the president just can't go around Congress. So living in a free society means that you don't always get your way. If one part of our country, say every Republican who supports Trump, if every Republican who supports Trump on this said, we get our way, then you wouldn't have a free society. That's not how our system works. We have a deliberative body, Congress, where we go and debate these things, and sometimes you get the outcomes you want, and sometimes you don't get the outcomes you want.
Depends on how much money you have.
That's how it works in our country.
Justin Marsh.
They're supposed to represent our opinions, not your own.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I have to represent, and I have to abide by the Constitution. My oath is to the Constitution of the United States. That's my first oath. That's my top oath as a congressman. Is to the Constitution of the United States. And our system of government is designed to be anti-democratic in some sense. There's a Constitution that we follow, and that means that sometimes, even if everyone in your district wants something, which is not the case, but even if everyone in the district wanted something and it violated the Constitution, I could not do that then. That's how our system works.
Justin Marsh.
Yes, that's my name. Yes.
I have a personal statement about this.
Yeah.
Next month, we're going to celebrate 25 years of my mother's death. My mother was run over and left for roadkill in Texas by an illegal. That person went back. So I have a really hard feelings about my mother's death. I was down on the border last month, and they are working hard to keep those people out. But why is it that these people come, then they qualify for our benefits that we work so hard as workers in this country, and they come and they plead, well, feed us, educate us.
Well, are you talking about illegal immigrants?
Illegal
I don't
immigrants.
think legal immigrants are qualifying for benefits.
Yeah, they're not qualified for
show up-
benefits.
They show up at the hospitals. They show up the hospitals. Right. They show up the hospitals. They're taken in, but something. I mean, I do not want our tax dollars to support these people. I mean, they're talking about to citizenship. You know, they come over.
No, they're not talking about citizenship
sir,
either.
Sir, I'm talking. I
Go
don't
ahead.
need your
Go
comments
ahead.
from me in your ear. Thank you. Sir, don't talk. I just want to make a statement. That's my feelings. I have a personal statement. If your parents or a relative was taken away from you, then you have that hard feeling.
Yep.
Okay? And that's wrong. Something has never been done. The person was arrested, let go. So the laws are not fair, especially to those people. They gather them, they let them go, they scattered with their other people in this country. Eventually, you know, and that's why I said I do not want them to take jobs away from our future grandkids or any other our people here.
I assume you're speaking of illegal.
Real illegals. They're in the kitchens and they're all over. They work in the yards.
So I don't think.
Yeah, they do the work we don't do.
I don't think anyone should come here illegally. I don't think.
I know you're talking.
One at a time. I don't think anyone should come here illegally. So I am with you that we should not have illegal immigration. I think we should improve our legal immigration system.
If they want to come in fair.
So if they want to follow the rules and come in the appropriate way, I'm with people on that. I think that would be good for our country to have an improvement to our legal immigration system. But I'm not for people coming here illegally. And, you know, you give the hospital example. I mean, what's a hospital to do? A hospital has to care for the people who come in. So, you know, I understood, but if you could have a tourist here as well who could come in, they're going to go to the hospital and they're going to get cared for, because we're not going to turn away people from hospitals in this country. So, you know, I think that you have to separate that from other types of benefits. I don't think they should receive any sort of federal benefits, like you know, some people might suggest.
Or state.
So, yeah.
You are pure asshole, mister.
So are you.
Yes.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Congress authorized something like $50 billion plus to build a wall. Where was that money?
So,
Leave him some food.
so my understanding is there was money authorized, and I think some of it was used already to build portions of fencing along the border. So, are you talking about like the, I forget the name of the legislation, but.
I forget what it was called too, but I recall it was in, I believe, 07 or 08.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm pretty sure that money was used to build fencing. So there's still a portion that did not get completed, but I think that it was used. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I have a background. I worked in agriculture, pharmaceutical fields, and I worked with people who are legal. It's not illegal. And I think a lot of the focus on illegal immigration tends to be on those people coming into our country, which I have a problem with. I think the people that are trying to legalize. And I don't think that we should attack them. I think that if you're truly Americans and trying to protect our country, we should hold our own accountable. And who is hiring illegal immigrants? And how are we holding those people accountable for paying lower wages instead of hiring Americans? If that is truly the issue, we need to hold ourselves accountable first.
So I think the statement was about holding Americans accountable for hiring people who are here illegally, rather than just going after illegal immigrants themselves and blaming them for the issue. And I understand that. And I think that companies should not be hiring people that they know to be here illegally. They shouldn't be creating a market for it to incentivize people to come over like that.
Is there any legislation on the way at all to do that?
People talk about E-Verify. I have some concerns with E-Verify for privacy concerns for Americans. Creating like a database that has all our information, and then it gets expanded and used to deny us employment for other reasons, deny Americans employment. So I think you have to be careful with a system like that, but I agree with you about your concerns about companies hiring people here. Yeah, go.
So I have one statement. First of all, if you're a legal immigrant, you are not entitled to any Social Security, any tax assistance. The only situation where
Speak.
And they're a refugee, and you are actually only able to get that for a couple of years. It's a special program. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. Illegal immigrants are not taking your Social Security, they're not taking tax benefits, they are not getting food stamps. My question to Congressman Amash is, how do you feel America is getting most of the illegal immigrants, and what is your solution for that?
How are they getting most of
Like,
it?
do you feel that most of them come here on a visa and it expires and they just don't go back? Or do you feel like they're illegally crossing the border? And then what is your personal solution to this?
Yeah, so I think probably the highest percentage now come on visas and overstay their visas. I don't know the exact percentage currently, but I think it's probably the highest percentage. Do it that way. I do think that there has been an increase along the border recently of people trying to come in for whatever reason. So you can obviously see that there are increased numbers lately. I don't know. I don't think that's like been a long-term trend, but it certainly seems to be the recent case. So I think the main problem is you have a broken legal immigration system. So it's very difficult for people to come here legally. If they can't come here legally, they start to look for other ways to come here. You also have the refugee situation because of people in parts of Latin America who are fleeing some countries and coming up here. So that's exacerbating the problem. But I really think if you improve the legal immigration system, you would significantly reduce illegal immigration. You need to find a way to allow people to come here. I think you'd probably end up with the same number of immigrants. I don't think there would be a big difference whether you made it. It's just that they'd be legal instead of illegal, and that would be a benefit to our society because if you're going to have immigrants coming one way or the other, they might as well be in situations where they're going to learn our language and be a part of our culture and be a part of our country. If they are coming in illegally and they have to hide because they're afraid of being deported and all sorts of other things, and of course it raises all sorts of hostilities and creates a lot of tension, they are much less likely to integrate into society. So they are more likely to then not become Americans, not feel like they're a part of society here, and I think that's a danger. So I'd like to see our legal immigration system improve, which would allow people to come here and feel like they're a part of our country and learn the language and become integrated and become fully Americans in that sense. And there's been look, my parents are both immigrants, and they came here legally, and I was American as you get, and I got elected to Congress. So, I think that it's a mistake to think that if people come here, they're not going to learn our ways and become a part of our society. I love the Constitution and our system of government more than anyone that I know. I really do love our system here, and I'm so blessed that I was born in this country. So I think that that's how other immigrants will feel if they're made to feel welcome.
Okay.
Go ahead.
As much as I hate to agree with you on the wall funding, I do, because I think the president overstepped his bounds there. I think you're right to stand up for the Constitution. And when we were talking about it, I was glad I heard the word lawlessness. Because to me, that's the biggest issue in this country right now, is the gain of momentum and lawlessness. We look at the Clinton email scandal and the unresolution there. The constant badgering of Trump over what breakfast cereal he eats or what fast food he serves for college kids. It's ridiculous to a point of ridiculousness. And when are you gonna start standing up for us, screaming that some of these people go to jail? Tony sat in front of Congress and volunteered that he was a leak to the New York Times. Gave that information freely to Congress.
Question.
Still has security clearance, I believe. Still getting paid.
Question.
When are you gonna start screaming from the top of every rope for everyone to listen that we in Congress are gonna do something about this and represent the people who can't?
Yeah. So, well, with respect to homing, I don't know whether that constitutes a crime or not. You know,
Leaks
these
classified
actions.
information, you don't know.
Well,
what constitutes
if you
a crime?
leak classified information, that is a problem.
Confidential meeting with the
But,
president's classified.
But again, I couldn't. I don't know the whole story on what was allegedly leaked and what was not leaked. But obviously, nobody should be leaking classified information to anyone. I think everyone. Listen, I think everyone should be. I think everyone should be held accountable when they do something wrong. I don't think that people should assume anyone's guilt, whether it's the president or Comey or anyone else. I've held people accountable before. When we had James Clapper come and lie to Congress, I've said he should be prosecuted for that many times. He's like a CNN personality now. And
But you let your voice fade, that's my point. We need that constant badgering. We need that representation.
You know, I understand that. I am not one who believes that, and maybe over the years I've come to appreciate different ways of influencing people and persuading people, but I think that constantly screaming about who needs to go to prison and that, I don't know that that's all that helpful. Like, I think that I really think Americans share more in common than they realize. And that if you talk to people on the other side of the aisle and really understood who they were at their core, you'd find that you have a lot more in common than you realize. But we are constantly being divided and told to yell at each other and hate each other and dislike each other. And I really think that's part of the game. That's part of the game by the people in D.C. to keep us all submissive and ignoring the real issues that are facing our country. I really am not a big fan of that style, and I think people do it on the left and on the right. And I agree with you that I think there is a double standard and that President Trump is treated by the media in a way that President Obama was not. I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that. And I agree with you that Hillary Clinton was not as scrutinized as she should be. I totally agree with you. But, I mean,
Yeah,
she
14
clearly violated
14
the
hearings.
statute. She clearly violated the statute, and she was told that, well, she didn't have, they said, well, she didn't have intent, and therefore, but by the terms of the statute, she violated. So, I agree with all that, but I do not think that is the most effective way to persuade people. I really think we need to find ways to come together as Americans. I do think that, I do believe very deeply in limited government, economic freedom, individual liberty, our Constitution, the rule of law, federalism, and I believe the way to bring people to these ideas is to talk about them and how they relate to their own lives, and help people see that whether you're on the left or the right, you probably agree with these principles too. I think people are quick to dismiss these principles and say, oh, I don't agree with those things. But actually, if you press people, they do agree with them. They tend to agree with them in the particular circumstances. So Democrats agree with the principles when they like a particular outcome, and then they disagree when they don't like the outcome. And Republicans do the same thing. I agree with those principles when I like the outcome, and I don't agree when I don't like the outcome. And I want to help people understand that actually these principles are good for us as a country overall. And I don't think just constantly saying like this person should be in jail or that person, or I have a lot of colleagues who go on TV every day and they talk about who should be in prison and this person's bad and that person's evil. And I do not think that's all that helpful. I just don't. You may think that, for example, you may think that for example, that I'm critical of the president, but you'll know that I am very careful about trying to debate on policy grounds. Like when I talk about, overstepping emergency powers, I'm not making fun of the president or saying anything bad about him personally. I will criticize on policy grounds or on constitutional grounds that I disagree with something. I think we just we have
Yes.
so
Yes.
I've co-sponsored legislation to have every president release tax returns. So,
Yes.
you are choosing to run for the office. This is not a case where the government is coming in and taking it from you unwillingly. You have decided to run for an office. We can prescribe rules for running for office, and we could say that someone would release their tax returns. And, we can set up the parameters for how that works as well. So
This should also then set up to provide
I think it's
proof of birth where you were born.
All your college, where you
And all your college records. I mean, how far do you want to go with this?
Yeah.
Listen, I really don't have problems with showing that you were born in the United States. So, because it's a requirement to be president. So, because the reason we must vet presidents more carefully is because they are one person who represent an entire branch of government, and the president has a lot of power. This is a person who controls all sorts of agencies, including the FBI, the IRS, and other agencies. I think we should be careful about vetting who this person is, whether it's a Republican or Democrat or anyone else. So I think having look, if people want to propose that, that's fine too. The issue is you have 535 members of Congress. You don't just have one person who is Congress.
I only have one representative.
So this is right, you do. But you've got 535. So the risks of something being a problem are much less with 535 people than with one person controlling an entire government. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
No, go ahead. Tom. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, I've lived in Michigan all my life, and the people who were picking the fruits, the apples, the cherries, the strawberries, the lettuce, those people were illegal immigrants, most of them. And so for 40 or 50 years, probably longer, we had this system of the Mexican labor would come and do the difficult, hard, back-breaking work that Americans didn't feel like doing. And they got cheap, fresh fruits and vegetables, sir. So you've been eating fresh fruits and vegetables picked by illegal aliens for much of your life. So listen, that was the system we had for about 50 years. We brought in cheap illegal labor, and nobody was bothered by it. Okay? Nobody was bothered by it until the last 5 years, when you guys started to get worried about, the cheap labor was great for those 50 years. So you've been benefiting on that. Okay, I'll stop on the immigrants and the hating of the Mexicans. Let me ask about the tax fraud. Okay, he mentioned, I think there's ample evidence that there's tax fraud, bank fraud, and insurance fraud by the president, because we don't have his tax returns. And Michael Cohen, be quiet, sir. You had a long speech there. Okay, so
let's all just please let him ask.
Yeah, I just want to ask. We have no idea of his. Oh, and the other thing is, Trump said he would divest of his foreign investments and his domestic investments. He has not divested of those. That's a violation of the Emoluments Clause in the Constitution. Do you think that the president is in violation of the Emoluments Clause, the domestic and the foreign, with conflicts of interest?
I don't know whether he is or isn't. I don't have evidence myself that he is. So, that's something that can be investigated. I do think that it probably makes sense for him to divest from some of these interests that he had, but, you know, I don't know.
He's got a
I don't know
hotel in
whether he-
Washington, D.C. He's got a hotel in
Yeah,
Washington, D.C.
He does, but I don't know whether that constitutes an
That's-
emoluments violation or not.
If foreign people are coming in and buying, taking up rooms, that's a violation of the emoluments clause.
There's perhaps some situations where it could, but it would not be on its face an emoluments violation, I think. So there could be situations that are like that, like if someone made a deal with him and said, "Hey, I'm gonna do this," or like he said, "I'll give you." If he said, "I'll give you a special break if you stay at my hotel," or something. So, but I haven't heard anything like that. I haven't heard any evidence like that. So there could be a situation like that, but I have no reason.
I thought it was just any benefit. If he receives any benefit from foreigners as a consequence of being president, it's not a quid
We
pro
don't know
quo.
that for example, if he owns a hotel and he owned that before he was president, who's to say